Welcome to the Biota.org podcast feed. I'm Tom Barbalet, and today something a little different. We've moved from the interviews, the conference series, into the conversations, and now a new idea, Biota.org chat. Here, Gerald Jung and I discussing Gerald's new developments with Darwin at Home with reference to my, 11-year now developments with Noble Ape, and various other kind of abstract artificial life related things that come up through the conversation. We are going to break these chats down into roughly half an hour each and probably spread them out over the next couple of months as Gerald continues to develop his new version of Darwin at Home, and issues will be discussed as they come up. I have one more lecture from the Biota 2 lecture series to put into the feed and a few more conversations to come. So hopefully you're enjoying these somewhat eclectic collections of artificial life related stuff, and if you have any comments or feedback, tom@nobleape.com.
One thing I'd like to do first off is to describe some of the work I've been doing in the last little while, which is I haven't been able to do too much. It's been a little sporadic because I've been very busy at work. So what I have now is I have the orb, and it's the environment, and there's gravity pulling towards the center of the orb, and the surface of the orb is acting as the floor.
The creation of a sphere and the geometric properties of the sphere based on the creation are really quite critical with this kind of stuff. You're using base polygons from 3 points being split evenly over the sphere, aren't you, in order to create the actual sphere?
Only in order to create the actual image of the sphere, because the way it's being treated conceptually is actually a sphere. So, the radius is used instead of the polygons.
Okay, so topologically what you're doing is the angular rotation at any given point, or what's the topological mapping for the actual creatures moving over the sphere?
Yeah, see, I'm not quite resolved on that, actually, because I'm trying to think of what is absolutely necessary to make it sufficiently convincing. And I'd really like to keep things limited, because the success I've had with Darwin at Home up to now has been a result of really squeezing it down. Keeping it in a very restricted sort of focused evolution. And I really can't imagine evolution happening unless it's got a lot of time to do what it has to do. So I kind of want to create a situation that's just exactly as complicated as it has to be. Do you know what I mean?
It's the idea of I'm reflecting currently on gene pool, but it's the idea of the petri dish in gene pool that enables the creatures to mate and mutate in a relatively confined area. What fascinates me about spheres in geometric terms is that they are almost the antithesis of what you're looking for in that circumstance, in the ability. Particularly, you can make trivial spheres that are relatively small, but when people conceptually create spheres for these kind of environments, they want to create large spheres. They're actually looking for the largest space that they can possibly geometrically simulate and still be sustainable with regards to graphics and all the other kind of, clunky things that come with these kind of simulations. So what I've found fascinating about spheres in artificial life simulation is that they are, in fact, the opposite of the petri dish in some regard. The beauty of the petri dish is that you're really confined on multiple sides. The sphere, you're not confined at all. Topologically, the entities can move infinitely in any given direction on a sphere.
Yeah, and they almost by definition have to encounter each other.
Well, if the sphere is of the right size. But what is beautiful in the sphere, which we see in the real world, is that the size and the length of time before they encounter each other are directly proportional in some regard. So maybe if you want your Darwin at Home creatures to meet within, say, a lifetime, then you'll construct a sphere based on that size. But as you want to do different kinds of evolution or experiment in different directions, just gradually increase the size of the sphere and see what happens.
Hey, I'm thinking about how to sort of make the bridge towards creatures that interact with each other. And my idea of Noble Ape, which is quite limited right now, I haven't really done too much with it, is that that's sort of your beginning point, having them sort of decide what to do and spending all your time thinking about how they would make that sort of decision. And not so much on a sort of a physics representation of it all, Is that true?
The ideas that came about in the formation of Noble Ape related to, in the kind of cognitive component of it, in the abstract ideas that I was seeing in epistemology and these kind of things in my philosophy studies at university, and the fact that I thought that these relatively abstract ideas could be mapped into computer simulations. So what you see in Noble Ape is really, on one side, my interest in biology and physics and these kind of things, meeting on the other side my interest in philosophy and psychology and simulating these things.
Do your creatures have a sort of a dialogue with each other somehow when they encounter?
There is a communication interface which is currently very primitive. My aim is in two parts. Firstly, to empower advanced users to write their own to refine the communication interface to make the communication more meaningful. And ultimately, there is the other kind of artificial life developer's dream where the Noble Apes will invent their own language and move forward in that direction.
Yeah, there's some academic studies in that direction in, I think it's University of Brussels.
It's Luc Steele, isn't it? Luc Steele?
Luc. It's actually Luc.
Luc. Ah, my apologies. Luck works for me in remembering it, but I'll keep that in mind. So the communication interface is relatively primitive currently.
So is it in some way related to physical proximity?
Currently, yes. But it's related to physical proximity. I wanted the communication interface to not just be with regards to verbal communication. I wanted it to have a component that allowed for, body gestures, the ability for them to communicate in ways that required visual contact as well as being in kind of audio space proximity too.
Sort of abstract senses, I guess.
Exactly. So this is why the communication interface in Noble Ape is the way it is currently. Although I'm fascinated to kind of move it in possibly 2 or 3 different directions with regards to visual, audio, and potentially also scent and things like that may also be simulated.
So you're sort of focusing on coding an individual.
Yes.
And this individual has the potential to interact with others.
Yes.
In the neighborhood, depending somewhat on proximity or not?
Somewhat, yes.
How is that expressed? I mean, I can imagine, for example, communications could be sort of broadcast out into the neighborhood, but it would be lossy if the distance was higher. Is that the way it's done?
I haven't put in the modelling of distance purely whether or not communication can take place. The way in which it operates, and this, again, I'm reflecting on code that I haven't looked at for a month or more, is that all the apes, and you see this when you look at the windows as well, when they communicate, they effectively broadcast, and the other apes have the option, which would be passively written through ape script or actively done through the simulated ape, to listen or not listen if they can hear it. So they have the option, if they know the ape is there, to either listen or not listen and then take the information from that. It's very rough currently. The communication implementation as it is currently has only been there for probably less than 12 months. But it was something that I added as an immediate need in order to encode real intelligent agents through ApeScript.
Sorry, what I'm trying to get to with Darwin at Home is that like everything is related to geometrical proximity and things like that. They would activate senses, and these senses would gather information from a particular physical proximity. And so it's really fascinating how different this is, if I understand you correctly.
The other aspect in Noble Ape, which you don't currently, or I don't believe you currently have in Darwin at Home, is the idea of line of sight. And because the landscape undulates in Noble Ape, the line of sight is relatively important for all these things.
You mean it actually changes as far as the individuals in Noble Ape are concerned? The landscape is constantly changing? It's
not constantly changing in reality, but their movement over the landscape means that their perception of the landscape is constantly changing. You need to think of it in terms of a DT versus a T in some regard.
Okay, yeah, now I understand. So they have line of sight knowledge of the world.
Certainly, yeah. You can see that actually because the selected ape will show all the apes that it can see in its line of sight in a slightly brighter red than the other ape. So as you move or select or observe, you'll see some of the apes are slightly brighter than the other apes, and that's directly related to the line of sight check. It was a nice little graphical thing that I threw in there when I implemented it. Great for debugging purposes as well. But to answer your question, so there is a communication component that has a line of sight currently. Obviously, with audio communication, if it was going to be encoded specifically, there would be some similar kind of distance check, which ultimately will be in the line of sight when it moves to a sphere simulated environment. It's not in the line of sight code currently. I wanted to add things like imperfect vision and stuff like that as well, which is really moving into what I'm trying to do in the kind of next phase of Noble Ape. But anyway, so does that answer your question with regards to communication?
Yeah, that clears something up for me, because I was trying to figure out how you were handling the locality of the creatures, because in some respects there has to be locality for each individual or each group.
The discussion with this is both in the Ape Reality podcast, but also in the documentation online through the Noble Ape manual that you can get to through the simulation page. There is what I call a speak-listen protocol, which is how they are actually communicating. So when you want to communicate, you just put some data into speak, and then the apes have the ability to listen to specific apes as they choose through their movement. There's nothing yet. Well, that can be written both passively and actively. What I'm interested in doing is creating more of a passive listening as well, and seeing, you don't want to make the apes paranoid. You don't want to make them too highly strung with regards to the environment, but there needs to be some kind of critical listening threshold that I'm still experimenting with, in terms of, there must be panic sounds or other things. What I'm trying to do in the next phase of the Noble Ape development is to return the predatorial cats and possibly other predators to the simulation environment very actively. And I think that's going to be the point where language and communication, I always say that kind of caveat, will be really important in Noble Ape, because you'll have a situation where the apes will have to stick together really in order to avoid these kind of predatorial cats or potentially predatorial birds or various other things.
What's really interesting when I'm listening to you and comparing it to the way I'm thinking about what I'm doing, it's fascinating how it's different, because what it comes down to is that you're coding in terms of the individuals. So you're coding in terms of the sort of like, you might say, semi-sentient individuals in a landscape. What I'm trying to code for, I'm trying to code at a different level. It's providing me with some challenges, but I think I have a couple of solutions that might make it through. See, what I'm trying to code is like the individual sort of muscle inside of a body.
It's locomotion versus cognition.
Wait, but not. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to incorporate cognition at the same level, which is going to be interesting if it's possible at all. So it's a little far-fetched, but the idea is that, for example, an individual interval in Darwin at Home would choose at a certain point to become an eye for a second, and to take a peek into the outside world. And if it saw something, then it might yell at the top of its lungs, effectively, to the other cells to change their way of movement so that some other thing starts happening. But none of them really understand what they're doing. That sort of stuff would have to evolve. It's quite a big challenge.
Yeah, I'm sure you appreciate stem cells and stem cell biology. And what fascinates me with the kind of new move of Darwin at Home is that you're creating digital stem cells, basically, that can become anything based on programming.
Yeah, and what I would like to experience, for example, just for 1 second here, is to have sort of a larger and a smaller version of the same thing running on the same code, but so the code was effectively able to handle creatures of different dimensions.
I have a few questions back to you with regards to the landscapes, because I think, aside from the psychology, philosophy, cognitive processes, whatever, and the biology, the landscapes was another thing that fascinated me with regards to the initial development, even prior to the development of Noble Ape. And it was something that was very powerful in my initial thinking about how to create a simulated environment. To date, the Fluidium Darwin at Home environments have been very flat, or curved, but effectively flat. And do you think changing the environment in some regard in a similar time frame to creating these kind of super stem cell creatures that build themselves would actually give more positive feedback, or are you interested in keeping the environment flat and just having a primitive gravity model initially? What's your thinking on that?
Yeah, my thinking on that is that that might be a bridge too far. You know what I mean? I'm trying to get this coalition of cells idea of an individual to get somewhere by survival of the fittest, which is a very expensive trial and error process. So I'm trying to figure out a way to give it a goal that it might be able to reach, and I don't think navigating in a complicated environment is within reach.
It's not necessarily navigation. I think my own fascination with aspects of artificial life is what comes out as an emergent property. And what I think would be really interesting with the stuff that you're doing is, rather than doubting the ability of emergence, and I don't want to kind of juxtaposition what you're saying with regards to the potential, but my feeling is that you should create as much chaos as possible and then see what comes out of the chaos, what evolves out of the chaos in some regard. So conceptually, whilst I appreciate your desire to create easily observable evolving systems in some regard, I think you will see amazing things come out if you move one step from that, move almost out of the comfort zone in some regard, and see what comes from a slightly more chaotic environment. I think what I've seen playing with Darwin at Home, both the intelligent design version and the previous version, if I've got the orders right, is the ability for people to come in and play with it and go away, and then come back and play with it and go away. And I think this is very powerful in terms of the kind of computational time and also the kind of interest that you've had so far. But just putting in a few additional factors, even slip coefficients, and changing the landscape a little bit, maybe meniscus landscapes and these kind of things, could create a completely different class of movers.
Yeah, but Tom, keep in mind here that I've got this the fundamental principle of this whole thing is the at-home part. The idea is somehow I've got to figure out a way to have people at home running something on their PC actually contributing to the evolution process, because otherwise I don't have access to the computer power.
Your concern here is the frustration component, that you don't want people to come to something that they're going to naturally get frustrated with and go away from quickly. What I put to you is that even by reaching the simulation part of your site, you already have a degree of users that are willing to contribute some of their time to play and interact and create, and you should utilize that energy to give them an environment where true Darwin at Home creatures may die, they may fail to climb hills, they may drown if you put fluid environments in, they may do all of these kind of things. I'll give you a noble ape example. Drowning the apes, actually physically taking them out in the water and watching them kind of flail around and eventually die, created a huge user group of kind of disgruntled university students when I first put out the Noble Ape simulation. And whilst I hadn't thought of it as an explicit feature, this was something that got a user base that I had never really thought about, and they tried to get their apes to swim better and these kind of things, and that became an additional game, an additional group of users which came to Noble Ape. My feeling is that the ability of a user base to have interest, it's typically come when they actually reach the site. I don't think you're going to dissuade users if their creature dies initially, or if the creature just completely flails around. If you look at Gene Pool as an example, a number of those creatures fail dismally, but that doesn't stop people from playing with Gene Pool. In fact, it makes it even more interesting, because you put one of the dumb creatures in that isn't doing anything, it's just kind of jiggling around, and mysteriously within, 10 minutes, that's the dominant creature, because all the fast movers have come, mated with it, swum off, had other creatures, and mysteriously you've just got a bunch of jiggling blobs. I mean, I think the play component is something that should be aimed to be expanded in the kind of artificial life development. And with regards to Darwin at Home, different kind of landscapes. I do like the idea of the kind of super stem cells. I think that's very interesting. And I think particularly the graphical interface on that is one of the exciting things, whether you have an iconic interface or whether you have a 3D representation that you drag and drop. I mean, the way in which that is handled will be interesting as well. But I don't think you should feel that you need to constrain the environment in any way in order to not frustrate users. I think users come and are excited and are interested and will do things probably beyond what one wants to initially assume with them.
I don't know. How about this? Here's a question for you. When people experience something like an artificial life program, is there a value in having them sort of emotionally connect with some particular individual in the artificial life simulation?
There are two schools of thought on this, and I ebb and flow between both of them. One says definitely yes, and this is the norm creature model where having a bonding experience with them is one of the most important things in terms of them being cute and what have you. I think most people that use or download artificial life simulations, however, are probably in a kind of more abstract realm with regards to the way in which they interact with the simulation. Now, intentionally when I created Noble Ape, I made sure that the entities within the simulation were named after or similarly named to real-world creatures. Obviously, they had no kind of physical, they weren't graphically modelled in that light, but I was very careful that everything that was simulated in Noble Ape had some biological connection in terms of reading biological texts and things like that with actual world creatures, and the simulation dynamics I tried to adjust so they had properties that were similar to those creatures. But in terms of personal connection to an individual simulated entity, I don't know. I'm in two minds about that. It would need to be a really rich graphical environment in order for them to, and this is really what Will Wright is doing with Spore. And even then, the kind of playthrough is at most probably 24 hours worth of solid playtime, and then you want to construct a new one. So in that sense, I think probably even the most basic kind of gameplay artificial life user is still not going to be, married to their particular created entity for longer than probably 24 hours worth of play. So in that regard, I would probably move away from that thinking.
Okay. I'm thinking also of the notion of participation and how people can, get somewhat the sense that they're involved. And until now, I've been able to do that to some degree, but I'm not all that happy with it. I mean, people can play with the physics. They can learn to build bodies if they want to take the time to do that, but that's quite rare that people go that far. What I'm trying to get at with what I'm working on now is the idea of sort of presenting to the user a kind of a multiverse. If you can imagine that. What I'm thinking of is sort of grabbing a chunk of the sphere and having that transported to the client. And on the client, what you would do is you would basically have chosen one individual or one coalition of cells as the one that you're going to evolve. And what you would then see is the environment of that one coalition. And you would see that coalition sort of appear in 50 different forms, all different mutations of the original. And they would all be traveling in the same world. It was like they're in the multiverse.
Certainly.
And the the participation would be people choosing which universe. So you'd have people sort of aiding the evolution in a way by choosing which universe is the correct one. And then the genes, the mutated genes of the one that they chose would be transported back to the server.
Now, possible worlds and abstract movements through possible worlds are, although it's the kind of bread and butter for a lot of people that develop artificial life, for a general person, I think, is relatively abstract. I've not seen good examples in kind of popular culture of a decent explanation of possible worlds. So that is an interesting user interface in some regard, but I think probably what a user would be more interested in doing is take the kind of virtual pet idea in some regard. If you are marrying them to an individual entity, give them the ability in some regard to, maybe protect that entity or nurture that entity, but to give them, as you say, possibly a matrix or 50 different possible examples having moved through a simulated set of events that go in a various set of directions through various possibilities is relatively abstract in some regard.
It might not be. It depends on what level you're thinking of. I mean, you might be thinking of this on a different level than I am. I'm thinking of actual, what happens in the next 15 seconds on the world. That's what I'm thinking of.
Okay, so in possible world theory, 15 seconds, unless there are bullets flying and various other things, don't give a lot of visual change.
In Darwin at Home, that would mean they will have taken a number of bounds in particular directions.
Okay, so this resolves down to how you describe time more than anything, because time has a very intimate connection with regards to a user, and you need to have some way of explaining what goes on in simulated time versus what goes on in real-world time. My personal sense is that 15 seconds worth of simulated time would need to be, even in terms of embryos and things like that, the original cell division, all this kind of stuff, you're talking about longer than 15 seconds, really. So I think 15 seconds is too small a time window to give people a list of possibilities.
It's not a list of possibilities. What they're seeing is imagine if a person divided up into 50 different people, and then sort of started doing different things depending on the mutated behavior patterns of all these 50 different people. And eventually, the room would be filled with this individual in all these different forms with slight modifications in its behavior. It's sort of like, phantoms. Each one of them is different. But they're all in the same space. And I think it might be very interesting to see that and to be, as a participant, making your choice among those universes, or among those different individuals. And it might be that, 15 or 30 seconds of the future would be enough, depending on what you saw them doing, depending on what exactly they can do in 15 seconds.
I put to you that it would either need to be an extremely fast... I mean, we're talking about 15 seconds of real world mapped into simulated time, but I put to you that 15 seconds, unless it was an environment that was a war zone or an environment that where the cell... reproduction was occurring very quickly.
Or a very tiny environment.
True, but that typically presupposes that, that the cell reproduction or whatever evolution is going on on the cellular level is going to be relatively quick as well.
I'm thinking of ants. Ants, how they live in the same time we do, but if you were to watch one, you would get very tired quickly because they're doing so much in a second. It's just impossible to follow.
What they find is, particularly with scent trails and other things with ants, even within 15 seconds, the number of choices that an ant typically would have wouldn't necessarily be that great in terms of possibilities.
Oh, it would. Sorry, it would be if you were talking about the decisions that the legs were making.
Okay. I don't know. I mean, if the decisions are in some way centralized and based on scent, true. I mean, the ability to put a leg down or up or move it sideways or what was going to be occurring in those terms. Well, I'm sure someone who is a specialist with regards to ant locomotion may disagree that there is in fact more automation or more perception of automation than we would allow for.
Tom, just imagine zooming in. Imagine going up to this ant colony and zooming in with your tiny little camera on an ant and watching it for 15 seconds. How many different activities it would be doing, how many different things it would be touching and manipulating around in that time. If you zoomed in close enough, you'd see all sorts of activity in 15 seconds.
Okay, so whilst this is an abstract philosophical argument, how does this map onto a user's experience? That would be my only question with regards to this.
Well, that's the difficult thing. I have to somehow create a scenario that is compelling enough, so I can try to imagine the creature running in a particular direction towards prey, for example. And if you saw like 50 examples of your creature emerging from the one and then going in various directions, and you saw one of them had noticed the prey, and you chose that, then you will have chosen for the genes that tend to take pictures in that direction, for example. I'm thinking at that kind of level. It's a very different story.
Yeah, I think of predators in terms of a wide variety of things, and I can see in an abstract sense how this works. I think the user interface and the way the story is explained to the user is going to be the interesting part with regards to the user interface. But certainly on an abstract sense, I can see how picking a wide variety of possible scenarios. But this also gives, philosophically, it's an interesting idea that it's in fact almost the death is imminent, and these kind of decisions in terms of how they affect the genetics are going to be really critical in terms of moving things forward. So you would need to have, in some regard, firstly, very short life cycles, relatively primitive genetics.
Oh yes, I'd say all of the above.
Yeah, exactly. So with those parameters in those settings, I think that sounds fine. But the user interaction is really all, in terms of successes of artificial life, in terms of the successes that are moving into games, that are moving into literature, and moving into popular thinking, the components of the interface and the way in which the simulation is constructed, even prior to creating the simulation, the story behind the simulation, these kind of things seem to be almost as critical, if not more critical, than what one is doing in the mechanics. So if we're thinking in abstract terms about how this is represented, we have these cells which form, what was the term used? Was it communities or collectives?
Coalitions.
Coalitions, sorry. I was going along the right initial letter at least. So do they mate and mutate on their own, or are they growing? Are they an energy dependent thing? Can you give some background to that?
Well, the idea is to make them indeed energy dependent. Everything they do is related to consuming energy. They have different abilities to communicate with the ones that they are physically connected with than they have to interact with effectively other coalitions that are connected to each other as well. So you've got an enhanced ability to communicate with your fellow cells, and some of them can take over the role of muscle, and some of them can become eyes.
Your neighbors.
Yeah, effectively your comrades, because all of you are working towards the success of the coalition, because it's the coalition that's able to replicate.
Thank you very much for listening to this inaugural Biota.org chat. If you have any feedback, tom@nobleape.com. If you have any contributions with regards to the interviews, or if you'd like to be in a conversation or even participate in the chat, or if you have any questions, more importantly, to put back into the chat discussion, tom@nobleape.com. Thank you very much for listening to this Biota.org podcast. Look forward to you tuning into the next podcast.